Alan Watts's most perilous insight was never primarily about mental illness, nor about any simple malfunction of the mind. What shook him most, and what he regarded as one of the most dangerous revelations in the study of human consciousness, was the discovery that certain people walk through life with an uncanny ability to see what others cannot. They notice what most overlook, what society unconsciously agrees to ignore. They see the hidden tremors behind gestures, the subtle flickers in the eyes, the weight that sits unspoken between words. They penetrate the mask people wear so instinctively that they cannot be deceived by polite smiles or empty rituals of reassurance. And yet, far from blessing them, the sensitivity tends to undo them. Watts understood that those who perceive too much often suffer not because of inner instability, but because the act of perceiving everything exacts a toll that ordinary human frameworks cannot accommodate. He described these rare individuals as bearing a form of differentiated perception, a kind of refined awareness so finely tuned that it resembles walking into a room and instantly absorbing not only the chatter and the faces, but the entire unspoken psychological climate. Imagine the capacity to sense, in an instant, who in the room is lying, who carries a concealed sorrow, who silently resents another but dares not voice it. Such a gift might sound divine, and in many ways it is extraordinary, yet Watts saw that it came at a terrible cost. The person who sees in this way often cannot engage in trivial conversation, for they are too aware of the currents beneath the surface. They cannot sustain ordinary friendships, because others feel exposed in their presence, as if every hidden crack in the facade is illuminated. They struggle to hold steady employment, for their very being disrupts the collective illusions that enable groups to function smoothly. To Watts, the problem was clear. The unconscious had become too conscious, the veil too thin, and society itself resists those who pierce its illusions. He gave accounts of individuals who lived in torment precisely because of this extraordinary vision. One woman, for example, appeared almost clairvoyant in her observations of others. When Watts questioned her carefully, he found her perceptions consistently accurate. She was not delusional, her mind was not inventing fictions. She was simply aware of psychological material others refused to notice. This, Watts insisted, was not madness, but rather an advanced form of consciousness. One that, paradoxically, endangered the very person who carried it. For the ability to perceive what is hidden isolates the perceiver. They become a mirror too bright, too penetrating, one that others cannot comfortably look into without flinching. In exploring this further, Watts turned to the notion of what he termed mystical participation, a kind of deep entanglement between the sensitive individual and the unconscious contents of their environment. He observed that some people absorb not just spoken words, but entire atmospheres. They do not merely listen to sentences, they ingest silences, tensions, longings that no one names aloud. Their inner compass becomes a barometer for unexpressed truths. Yet this very sensitivity creates exhaustion, because one cannot continually live as a receiver for the unprocessed material of others without risking collapse. Modern psychology later described something similar under the language of high sensitivity, confirming that a portion of humanity lives with heightened perceptual and emotional attunement. Watts, however, had already intuited that within this sensitivity lay different varieties, different inflections of intuitive consciousness, each shaping the sufferer's path in its own way. He noted that some are feeling intuitives, carrying not just awareness of another's emotions, but the actual weight of those emotions in their own bodies. They feel another person's grief as though it were their own. Their skin becomes permeable to the sorrows of others. Others are thinking intuitives, visionaries of patterns, able to forecast the collapse of a relationship or the inevitable failure of a plan long before others see it. Still others are sensation intuitives, who sense the body's whispers before illness is even acknowledged, who notice the tension in a jaw, the heaviness in a step, the fatigue hidden beneath insistence, And beyond these lies, the pure intuitive, the rarest of all, who lives almost permanently in the realm of unconscious vision, perceiving with such clarity that ordinary social life feels alien. Watts warned that without integration, this kind of seeing threatens survival. Three dangers especially haunted him. The first is disruption of the collective order. Society depends on unspoken agreements, polite deceptions, unconscious shadows that hold groups together. The one who breaks these illusions threatens the fabric of belonging. If these reflections are offering you a moment of clarity or calm, I warmly invite you to support Listening Mind by subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Each gesture of support helps us continue creating meaningful content and allows this community of thoughtful listeners to grow. The second danger is psychological isolation. When your greatest strength sets you apart, you become stranded on an island of awareness, unable to fully join the sea of unconsciousness in which most people swim contentedly. And the third danger, perhaps the most subtle, is a dissolution of the self. The risk that by absorbing so much of others' unconscious material, you lose track of what belongs to you. Without clear boundaries, individuality itself begins to evaporate. For Watts, the challenge was not to suppress this perception, but to integrate it. He advised those afflicted with such perception to practice solitude deliberately, to spend time apart so that what is absorbed from others could settle, and one's authentic voice could be distinguished from the chorus of absorbed energies. He emphasized the importance of shadow integration, reminding that the ability to see others' flaws often mirrors unintegrated material in oneself. And finally, he spoke of conscious participation, the capacity to engage the unconscious of others without drowning in it, to act as a bridge between unconscious and conscious realms without sacrificing one's own identity. He illustrated the double edge of such perception with examples from philosophy and spirituality. Consider, he said, figures like Nietzsche, who saw through social and religious facades with devastating clarity but failed to integrate those perceptions into a life-affirming path. The result was collapse. Contrast this with mystics like Meister Eckhart, who also perceived deeply into spiritual and psychological realities, yet translated his insights into words of compassion and nourishment. The difference was not in what they saw, but in how they bore it. One turned perception into a weapon, the other into a vessel of wisdom. Watts admitted that he himself nearly succumbed to the same dangers. His own heightened perception of the unconscious currents in himself and others once drove him close to collapse, but he eventually realized that these overwhelming perceptions were not signs of illness. They were glimpses of evolution, consciousness pushing at the boundaries of what humanity as a whole could endure. Once he understood this, his attitude shifted. He began to see that those with similar gifts were not misfits to be pitied, but pioneers of awareness, forerunners of what human consciousness might one day embody more fully. From this recognition arose his counsel about relationships. For the perceptive individual, it is essential to find fellow travelers, others who have also undergone individuation, whose presence feels unmistakably authentic. When such individuals meet, there is an immediate recognition, a resonance beyond words. He also emphasized the value of natural containers. Those who, even if they do not share the same depth of perception, have the strength to hold such perception without panic or rejection. These are often people seasoned by suffering, tempered by life, who can listen without defensiveness. In their company, the perceptive one can speak freely without fear of scapegoating. Watts described the journey of integration as unfolding in stages. First, acknowledging one's gift without being crushed by it. Next, learning to wield perception without isolation, using it constructively rather than as an excuse for superiority or withdrawal. Then learning to offer it in service, to use perception not for domination or critique, but as a way of illuminating paths for others. And finally, reaching a state of detachment where perception is exercised without attachment to whether it is accepted, rejected, or misunderstood. At that stage, one simply becomes a quiet agent of consciousness, helping to bring the unconscious into light wherever one happens to be. He warned of pitfalls, however: inflation, the temptation to identify with the gift, mistaking perception for absolute truth; withdrawal, the tendency to flee society, convincing oneself that others are too blind to engage with; role fixation, hiding behind the persona of the sage or seer rather than remaining a full, vulnerable human being; and relapse, the risk of becoming flooded once again by unconscious contents during times of stress. True integration, Watts insisted, is not a one-time achievement, but a continual balancing act, a dynamic process of consciousness. Ultimately, Watts saw the existence of such perceptive individuals as essential for human evolution. They are the ones who carry seeds of the future, sensing patterns and possibilities long before the collective is ready. Their task is not to be martyrs to vision, but to be bridges, helping humanity cross from its unconscious patterns into greater awareness. The highest stage of this integration comes when the perceiver can see without clinging, perceive without demanding that others recognize or accept. To hold perception lightly, to let it guide without enslaving. That, for Watts, was wisdom. He described how even those once broken by perception could, with conscious effort, learn to live differently. One woman he had known, who once saw her gift as a curse, eventually learned to separate her own feelings from what she absorbed from others. She found a place as a counselor where her perception became healing rather than destructive. She formed relationships with those who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her vision as a torment and began to regard it as a responsibility, not to be silenced, but to be carried with care. Watts concluded that superior perception is not a flaw in the design of a psyche. It is an advanced feature of consciousness, ahead of its time. The danger is not in seeing what others miss, but in failing to cultivate the maturity to live with what is seen. The path of individuation, of conscious integration, is therefore not optional for such people. It is urgent, even a matter of survival. For when perception is integrated, the individual ceases to be an isolated sufferer and becomes instead what Watts called a pioneer of consciousness, one who walks slightly ahead, preparing humanity for the unfolding of awareness that is coming but not yet visible. This, then, was Alan Watts's most dangerous discovery. Not simply that some perceive more than others, but that most of those who perceive do not know how to live with it wisely. And therein lies the true peril. Not perception itself, but the absence of wisdom to integrate it, to temper it, and to turn it from curse into gift. Those who manage this integration become bridges between worlds. Those who fail are consumed. Thank you sincerely for sharing your time with Listening Mind. Your presence here means more than you can imagine. If today's video has brought you value, a subscription and a like are a wonderful way to help us continue on this journey of reflection and empathy together. From the heart, thank you for being part of this space.